Welcome to This Explainer. Look, if you're a university student of international relations, or really just a focused learner trying to make sense of the rapidly shifting geopolitics in Asia right now, this session is absolutely for you. Today, we're unpacking a profound and, frankly, super complex strategic shift happening in the Indo-Pacific. We're going to examine the exact strategic logic behind India's sudden, full-throated embrace of the Quad. That major grouping of Australia, India, Japan, and the United States. We really want to figure out why India finally joined a coalition it had actively resisted for so long. And to do that, we're going to dive into a truly fascinating academic framework known as zone balancing. Okay, let's take a quick look at our roadmap for today. First, redrawing the mental map. Second, the limits of evasive balancing. Third, introducing zone balancing. Fourth, the Quad's strategic logic. And finally, forging new Asian partnerships. All right, let's jump right into part one, redrawing the mental map. To truly understand India's current foreign policy, we first have to understand how its geographic perception of the entire world has fundamentally expanded. Seriously, you cannot grasp the strategy without grasping the map. If we rewind to the early post-war 1940s, the influential Indian diplomat and thinker K.M. Panikkar actually envisioned an Indian security sphere. And this wasn't small. He saw it extending all the way from the Persian Gulf across to Burma, Siam, and Singapore. But as the Cold War set in, India's focus shifted sharply inward and westward. It wasn't until the 1990s, following a really severe domestic economic crisis and, of course, the end of the Cold War, that India initiated its famous Look East policy, aiming to re-engage with the booming tiger economies of Southeast Asia. Fast forward to the 2020s, and we see the fully expanded Indo-Pacific concept totally taking hold. India's mental map is no longer confined just to the subcontinent. It now encompasses this massive, interconnected maritime theater. India's Minister of External Affairs, Jaishankar, really hit the nail on the head here. As he noted, this wasn't just some simple political rebranding exercise. It was a profound strategic correction. The center of gravity for India shifted decisively eastward, integrating both the Indian and Pacific Oceans into a single, cohesive strategic continuum. It completely redefined India's modern sense of belonging to a much wider Asia, setting the stage for a totally new approach to regional security. Which brings us to part two, the limits of evasive balancing. Now, navigating this newly expanded map required a serious strategy, especially when you're facing a rapidly rising and increasingly assertive China. In traditional international relations theory, a state basically has a few classic options. The first is internal balancing. This essentially means aggressively building up your own economic and military might to directly match your rival. Think of it like bulking up at the gym to fight the biggest guy there. But for a state like India, which is navigating a modestly growing economy and a relatively flat defense budget compared to China's absolutely massive military modernization, matching a superpower symmetrically through internal balancing alone is an incredibly heavy, prohibitively expensive burden. It's just not practical on its own. So the second traditional option is external balancing. This is when a state aggregates power by forming binding treaty alliances with other states against a common rival. NATO in the Euro-Atlantic context is the classic example. You call in your friends for backup. Yet, India has historically and very consistently resisted formal military alliances. Driven by a deep-seated post-colonial desire to maintain absolute strategic autonomy and a very long legacy of non-alignment, India has kept traditional external balancing firmly off the table. Put simply, they absolutely do not want to be a junior partner in anyone else's security pact. So what on earth did India actually do? Well, for years, they relied on a really fascinating hybrid approach. The scholar Rajesh Rajagopalan coined the term evasive balancing to describe this highly nuanced strategy. Basically, India would take some measured, defensive steps, but crucially, they would offset them with major diplomatic concessions to reassure China that their intentions were not hostile. It was a delicate dance. A prime example of this was India's deliberate hesitation for years to deepen its involvement in the Quad. They kept it at arm's length specifically to avoid antagonizing Beijing and triggering a security dilemma. But, that delicate dance couldn't last forever. The year 2020 delivered two massive, simultaneous shocks that essentially broke the old system completely. First, you had the deadly, hand-to-hand border skirmishes between Indian and Chinese forces in the freezing heights of Ladakh. That horrific event effectively demolished the decades-old diplomatic framework that had managed to keep the border relatively peaceful. Second, the COVID-19 pandemic exposed severe, crippling vulnerabilities in international supply chains, highlighting a highly competitive, self-help international system. These dual shocks carried immense gravity. They proved definitively that the old diplomatic framework of evasive balancing was just no longer viable for New Delhi. They needed a new playbook. And that leads us to part 3, introducing zone balancing. With the old strategy totally shattered in 2020 and traditional military alliances still completely off the table, India needed a novel conceptual framework to secure its interests in this vast new Indo-Pacific theater. Enter zone balancing. This is a theoretically novel concept introduced by scholar Arzan Tarapore. Unlike traditional balancing, zone balancing focuses not on matching a rival's power directly, but on hardening the geographic zone of competition itself. The goal is to broadly bolster the capacity and resilience of third-party regional states. By making these smaller states stronger, you inherently limit the rival power's ability to coerce, bribe, or subvert them. Let's compare this to traditional IR theories to really make it click. External balancing is direct. It is all about forming a dyadic military pact aimed squarely at a rival. You are literally building a wall to stop an opponent. Zone balancing, on the other hand, is indirect. It doesn't seek formal alignment, it doesn't want joint commands, and it doesn't demand military commitments from target states. Instead, it aims to provide regional states with the independent strength to resist predatory influence on their own terms. It actively shapes the strategic environment rather than directly attacking or containing the rival. Now, while the specific term zone balancing is brand new to the academic literature, Tarapore points out a somewhat surprising fact. The actual practice isn't entirely without precedent. A classic historical example is the U.S. Marshall Plan in Europe right after World War II, or even the major U.S. economic aid given to India in the 1950s. The United States pumped vast amounts of economic aid into these regions not to form immediate binding military alliances, but to prevent sheer economic collapse and subsequent political subversion by the Soviet Union. They were effectively hardening the zone by building regional resilience. Let's move to part 4. The Quad's strategic logic. So how does all this theory apply today? Well, this academic framework of zone balancing perfectly explains the sudden energization and the very specific institutional design of the modern Quad. When we look at the Quad's official agenda since its leader-level summits kicked off in 2021, it might look surprisingly non-military to the untrained eye. It is conspicuously focused on international public goods, delivering billions of COVID-19 vaccines, mitigating climate change, regulating emerging technologies, funding transparent infrastructure, and rolling out the Indo-Pacific Partnership for Maritime Domain Awareness. Guys, this is textbook zone balancing. The Quad is providing the exact material and institutional benefits that regional states desperately need, thereby shrinking the vacuum for any single rising power to exert predatory influence. Which leads us to a critical, almost paradoxical question for our lecture today. Why does a grouping born entirely out of great power's strategic rivalry so explicitly and so repeatedly avoid the label of a military alliance? The answer lies deeply embedded in the theory of zone balancing itself. To successfully build regional resilience, the Quad absolutely must remain unprovocative. Think about it. If the Quad suddenly declared itself an Asian NATO, it would force smaller, vulnerable regional states to definitively choose sides. This would alienate them immediately and directly contradict the sacred diplomatic principle of ASEAN centrality. Furthermore, it would trigger a severe cascading traditional security dilemma with Beijing. By strictly sticking to zone balancing, the Quad avoids the highly divisive nature of a direct military pact like AUKUS, ensuring it remains inclusive, appealing, and broadly accepted across the incredibly diverse Indo-Pacific. And finally, part 5, forging new Asian partnerships. Now, zone balancing at the formal multilateral level is only part of the equation here. To truly secure the Indo-Pacific, India has had to overcome the hesitations of history to establish profound and sometimes quietly ironic strategic synergies. With Japan, India has found a crucial, highly trusted partner for its own internal economic modernization, fueled by massive official development assistance and deeply rooted in shared democratic values. And with Australia, the progress is just remarkably rapid. They've established reciprocal logistics sharing agreements and unprecedented military exchanges. It is an amazing reality that today, Indian and Australian P-8 maritime patrol aircraft are literally landing at each other's highly secure military bases. That was unthinkable not too long ago. What's absolutely fascinating here is this sophisticated dual-track approach they are running. While the formal Quad strictly handles the public goods and the unprovocative zone balancing, these direct, hard-security military collaborations form what analysts call the informal Quad. Things like the massive, complex Malabar naval exercises are deliberately relegated to bilateral and trilateral arrangements outside the official diplomatic Quad summit agendas. So they are systematically building robust external balancing capacity quietly on the side, precisely to ensure the formal Quad framework remains totally unprovocative to the wider region. It's a brilliant balancing act. And this finely tuned posture is playing out in real time. India is steadily increasing its cooperative maritime footprint in East Asia, actively participating in the protection of critical regional sea lanes. However, it remains highly cautious and highly calculated. India is not looking to assume a massive, dyadic balancing role against China in China's own primary backyard. And it steadfastly maintains its overarching strategic autonomy, successfully avoiding a grand, traditional, binding military alliance with the United States. Throughout this entire geopolitical shift and amidst all these new partnerships, India has consistently acknowledged one absolute geographic reality: ASEAN. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations remains the vital crossroads and the essential diplomatic conduit. Without ASEAN acting as this central, stabilizing bridge, the very concept of merging the Indian and Pacific Oceans into a unified, functional Indo-Pacific theater would be a literal geographic impossibility. They are the glue that holds the map together. However, as scholar Arzan Tarapore concludes, as students of international relations, we really must recognize the sobering structural limitations of this grand strategy. Zone balancing is fundamentally an incomplete strategy. It is fantastic for shaping the geopolitical environment, building resilience, and preventing subtle gray zone coercion. But it is absolutely no substitute for hard military balancing. If a major conflict actually erupts, delivering vaccines and signing infrastructure loans will not replace the hard military power and kinetic deterrence required to stop direct armed aggression. So I'll leave you with this final, provocative thought to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. If zone balancing is India and the Quad's primary tool to shape the resilience of the region, is it really enough to maintain long-term peace? What happens to this carefully constructed Indo-Pacific architecture if strategic competition bypasses economic coercion entirely and escalates into direct, hard power aggression? Keep that in mind as you watch this fascinating region continue to evolve. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive.